The words cut through the cold night air before Grace even reached the center of the stone circle. I, Ethan, son of Alpha Richard, reject Grace of Silver Creek as my mate and my future Luna. 5 packs stood gathered under the rising blood moon, and every single one of them heard it. For a moment, Grace thought her heart had simply stopped. 8 years. 8 years of being promised to this man, of standing beside him at every festival, of believing that the boy who once carried her home on his back would one day place a crown of wildflowers on her head, and he had just thrown her away in a single breath. "Say it back," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but he would not look at her eyes. "Say the words, Grace, release me." Grace felt hundreds of eyes pressing against her skin. She saw the elders of the 5 packs leaning forward. She saw the young wolves smirking behind their hands, and she saw her, standing at Ethan's right side in a gown of pale gold. Victoria Bell, the Pureblood Omega, the girl with the perfect bloodline, the perfect face, and the perfect smile that never once reached her eyes. "Why?" Grace asked. Her voice did not shake. She refused to let it shake. Ethan finally lifted his gaze, and what she saw there hurt worse than anger. She saw pity. "You have no wolf, Grace. You know it. The whole territory knows it. A wolfless girl cannot carry a pack. She cannot run with us under the moon. She cannot give strong heirs. The moon goddess herself has shown the elders a sign. If I make you Luna, Silver Creek will fall." He paused, and his next words came out softer, which somehow made them crueler. "Victoria is a pureblood Omega. Her line goes back 10 generations without a single flaw. She is what a Luna is supposed to be. You are just what you are. Just what you are." 20 years of her life, folded into 4 small words. Victoria stepped forward then, her golden gown whispering against the stones. "Do not be bitter, Grace," she said sweetly, loud enough for all 5 packs to hear. "You were a lovely placeholder, but surely, even a healer's daughter understands that a crown belongs on a worthy head." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Grace's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her mother had been the finest healer Silver Creek had ever known. Her mother had pulled half of these laughing wolves back from death with her own 2 hands before the river took her. And they laughed. Alpha Richard rose from his carved chair, his heavy voice rolling over the circle. "The rejection has been spoken before witnesses of 5 packs. Grace, daughter of Helen, step forward for the severing." She could have begged. Some small, frightened part of her whispered that if she dropped to her knees right now, if she cried, maybe Ethan would remember the boy he used to be. But Grace looked at his face, at Victoria's hand already resting on his arm like it had always belonged there, and the frightened part of her went quiet forever. She stepped forward. The severing was worse than she had imagined. The head elder pressed his thumb against the promise mark on her collarbone, the small silver crescent she had carried since she was 12, and spoke the old words. The mark burned as it faded, a deep, tearing heat, like something being pulled up by the roots. Grace bit down on her tongue and made no sound. She would give them nothing, not a tear, not a whimper. When it was over, her skin was bare, and the bond that had hummed quietly at the edge of her mind for 8 years was simply gone, leaving a hollow space that echoed. "By pack law," Alpha Richard announced, "a rejected wolfless woman holds no place at the Luna trials and no claim on this pack's protection. Grace, you are granted until sunrise to leave Silver Creek territory." Until sunrise, they were not even giving her a day. Grace lifted her chin. She looked at Ethan one last time, and she made sure he saw that her eyes were dry. "One day," she said quietly, "you will understand exactly what you gave away tonight. I hope you survive the understanding." Then she turned her back on the blood moon ceremony, on the 5 packs, on the only home she had ever known, and she walked out of the stone circle with her spine straight as a blade. She did not see the tall figure in a black hooded cloak standing motionless in the deepest shadow of the tree line, far from the torches, where no one had thought to look. She did not see the way his head turned slowly, tracking her, and only her, as she left. The storm broke an hour later. Grace walked the border road with a canvas bag over her shoulder that held everything she owned. 2 dresses, her mother's worn book of remedies, a silver pendant shaped like a closed moonflower, the only thing Helen had left her. Rain hammered down through the pines, cold as needles, and thunder rolled across the black hills. She had no plan. There was no plan for a girl like her. Rogue territory would eat her alive. The human towns did not welcome pack-born strangers. She walked, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. The lights appeared through the rain like a row of low, moving stars. Grace stepped off the road as the convoy came around the bend. 6 black carriages, iron-wheeled and rain-slicked, drawn by horses larger than any she had ever seen. Riders flanked them in dark armor, and on every banner, silver thread caught the stormlight in the shape of a crescent moon swallowing a crown. Her breath stopped in her chest. She knew that banner. Every wolf on the continent knew that banner, the royal crest of the Lycan King. The lead carriage should have rolled past her. Instead, impossibly, the entire convoy slowed. Then it stopped, right there on the flooded road, and the door of the first carriage opened. The man who stepped down into the rain was tall enough that the riders looked small beside him. He wore black, no crown, no jewels, and he did not seem to notice the storm at all. The rain touched him and appeared to lose its nerve. Grace could not see his face clearly in the darkness, but she could feel him, a pressure against her senses, like the air before lightning strikes, and every instinct she had screamed one word at her. Alpha, but more than Alpha, something older, something more. You are a long way from the ceremony, he said. His voice was low and calm, the kind of voice that had never needed to be raised. Grace of Silver Creek, rejected under a blood moon in front of 5 packs. Cast out before the fires were even cold. Her stomach dropped. You were there. I was in the shadows. Kings hear more from shadows than from thrones. He came closer, and lantern light from the carriage finally found his face. He was younger than she expected, with hard, striking features and eyes of dark gold that seemed to hold their own light. I watched a boy throw away the most interesting woman in 5 packs because his elders read lies in the smoke, and I watched that woman walk out with her head unbowed while her whole world laughed at her. Tell me, Grace, what do you want now? The question was so unexpected that the truth came out before she could dress it up. I want to never kneel to any of them again. Something flickered across his face. If she had not known better, she would have called it approval. Then, I will make you an offer, and I will make it only once, he said. I am Adrian, king of the Lycans, ruler of every pack that runs under the moon. My court is a nest of noble families who each dream of chaining me to one of their daughters. I need a queen who owes them nothing, fears them nothing, and belongs to none of them. You need a name so high that no wolf alive can ever spit on yours again. He extended one hand into the rain between them. Marry me, tonight. Grace stared at him. Thunder cracked over the hills. You do not know me. I know you did not cry, Adrian said. I know you warned him instead of begging him. That is more than I know about most of my court after 10 years. His golden eyes held hers. This is a marriage of terms, not a fairy tale. My terms are 2. Honesty between us, always. And loyalty before the world, always. Everything else, we decide as we go. And if I say no, then my convoy takes you safely to any city you name, with gold enough to start a life, and you never see me again. He said it simply, and she believed him. And somehow that was the thing that decided her. He was giving her a real choice. It was more than anyone had given her in 20 years. Grace thought of Ethan's pitying eyes. She thought of Victoria's golden gown and the laughter of 5 packs. She thought of the long, empty road behind her and the longer, emptier one ahead. Then she put her cold hand into the hand of the Lycan King. I accept, she said, both terms. They were married at midnight in the Citadel Chapel, a vast stone hall lit by 1,000 white candles, with rain still drumming against the high windows. Grace stood in her travel-stained dress before an altar older than any pack, and an ancient priestess bound their wrists with a silver cord and spoke words in the first language of wolves. Adrian's voice never wavered through the vows. Neither did hers. When the priestess placed the queen's circlet on Grace's wet hair, the metal was strangely warm, as if it had been waiting for her. There was no kiss. Adrian simply looked down at her and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "No one will ever make you small again. That, I promise you." And Grace, who had lost everything at sunset, went to sleep that night as the highest-ranked woman in the world. Far away, dawn crept gray and cold over Silver Creek. Ethan sat at the head table of the victory feast that had gone on all night, a strange, dull ache spreading behind his ribs that no amount of wine would touch. He was reaching for his cup when the border runner burst through the hall doors, soaked and white-faced, shouting for Alpha Richard. The hall fell silent as the runner gasped out his message. The rejected girl. The royal convoy on the North Road. The midnight wedding, witnessed and sealed in the citadel itself. Ethan's cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the stone floor. Grace, the wolfless girl he had thrown away in front of 5 packs, was now queen of the Lycans. Queen over every alpha, every elder, every pack that drew breath under the moon. Queen over Silver Creek. Queen over him. And her husband's first royal decree was already traveling down the mountain roads, carried by riders in black armor, ordering the alphas and heirs of all 5 packs to appear at the citadel within a fortnight, to kneel, and to swear their loyalty to their new queen, face to face. The knives came out on Grace's very first morning as queen, and not one of them was made of steel. Your Majesty, purred Lady Cora, the silver-haired head of the court's oldest noble house, as the ladies gathered in the sunlit breakfast hall. Forgive my curiosity, but we have all heard the strangest rumor. They say you have no wolf at all. Surely that cannot be true. Surely our king would not bind the Lycan crown to a defective bloodline. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. 20 noblewomen watched Grace over their teacups, waiting for her to flinch. Grace set down her own cup without a sound. You heard correctly, Lady Cora. I have no wolf. She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, then smiled. Which means that unlike everyone else at this table, whatever I accomplish here, I will accomplish without claws. I would think that frightens you far more. Nobody laughed. But an old servant refilling the tea had to turn her face away to hide her expression, and by evening, the queen's answer had traveled through every corridor of the citadel. That set the pattern of Grace's new life. The Lycan court was a beautiful, glittering battlefield, and she was a target painted in gold. Invitations arrived designed to embarrass her. Conversations switched to the old royal tongue the moment she entered a room, so she began studying it secretly at night, until, 3 weeks in, she answered Lord Hale's insult in his own ancient language, flawlessly, in front of the full council. Dresses were delivered in the wrong sizes. Servants were bribed to be slow. Grace endured all of it the same way she had endured the stone circle, with a straight spine and dry eyes, and she noticed that a strange thing began to happen. The servants, the guards, the kitchen staff, the stable hands, the invisible people of the citadel, began to love her. She learned their names. She treated their burns and fevers with her mother's remedies when the royal physicians would not be bothered. The nobles called her the wolfless queen with a sneer. The servants started saying it differently, almost like a title of honor. The king himself remained a mystery living down the hall. Adrian was courteous, distant, and almost never there. He rose before dawn and trained alone. He held councils she was not invited to, then quietly sent her the notes afterward, as if he could not decide whether to keep her out or let her in. He had books delivered to her rooms, histories of Lycan law, maps of the territories, and once, without any note at all, a new copy of her mother's remedy book, its cracked binding restored by the royal bookbinder. He noticed everything and explained nothing. And then there were the wolves. The royal kennels housed the king's werewolves, massive gray beasts bred for battle, so fierce that only 3 handlers in the citadel could approach them. Grace found them by accident on her 9th day, taking a wrong turn in the lower yards. The moment she stepped through the archway, every wolf in the enclosure went silent. Then, one by one, the great animals came to the fence, lowered their heads, and lay down at her feet like puppies before a fire. The head handler stood frozen with a feed bucket in his hands. 20 years I have served these kennels, he whispered. I have never seen them do that. Not for the handlers, not for the king himself. Grace reached through the fence and rested her hand on a scarred gray head, and deep inside her chest, in the hollow place where her severed bond used to live, something turned over in its sleep. She told no one about the feeling, but she started dreaming of silver light. On her 19th night in the citadel, the roaring began. It tore Grace out of sleep, a sound she felt through the floor before she heard it, deep and ragged and wrong, coming from the North Tower. She stepped into the corridor and found chaos. Guards running with heavy chains. Servants pressed against walls, whispering prayers. And Martha, the old royal healer, hurrying past with a bottle of gray sedative clutched in shaking hands. Go back to your rooms, Your Majesty, Martha pleaded. Please, you must not see this. See what? Grace demanded, already following her. What is happening to him? The old healer stopped at the base of the tower stairs, and the look on her face was pure grief. The same thing that happened to his father, she whispered. The beast is eating the man. It comes at night, worse each season. One day it will not give him back. That is how the old king ended, Your Majesty. His mind burned away, and his own guard had to stand against him. Adrian has forbidden us to speak of it. He would rather die quietly than let the court see. Overhead, the roar came again, and half the torches in the stairwell shivered out. The guards at the tower door refused to open it. Majesty, he is not himself. He gave orders. No one enters when the fit is on him. No one, on pain of banishment. Wonderful, Grace said. Banish me. She pulled the iron bolt herself and stepped inside. The tower room was destroyed. Furniture lay in splinters. The great window stood cracked from side to side. And in the center of the wreckage crouched something that was Adrian, and was not. He was half-changed, huge and wrong, black fur bleeding across his shoulders, hands hooked into claws, and his eyes, when they snapped up to her, were not gold anymore. They were black all the way through, and there was no recognition in them at all. Every instinct Grace had screamed at her to run. She stepped forward instead. Adrian! She kept her voice low and even, the voice her mother had used with wounded animals and dying men. You are Adrian, king of the Lycans, and you are stronger than this thing wearing your skin. Come back. The beast snarled, and rose to its full, terrible height. Grace kept walking. 3 steps. 2. She could feel its breath, hot as a furnace. Behind her, at the doorway, she heard the guard's horrified whispers. She lifted her hand and laid it flat against the black fur of his chest, over his hammering heart. The change was instant. The beast shuddered from head to foot, like a fever breaking. The black drained out of his eyes, gold flooding back in behind it, and the fur receded, and the claws became hands, and then Adrian was on his knees in the wreckage, gasping, human, staring up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It took her a moment to name it, because it looked so foreign there. Fear, not of the beast, of her seeing him like this. You should not have come in here, he rasped. You told me your terms the night we married, Grace said softly, kneeling in front of him among the splinters. Honesty always. You are a hypocrite, Your Majesty. A broken sound came out of him, half laugh, half something rawer. And for a long time, while the guards kept their distance and the torches burned low, the most feared king in the world sat on the floor of a ruined tower, with his forehead resting against his wolfless queen's shoulder, and shook. He never spoke of it afterward. But the next morning, for the first time, a place was set for Grace, at the king's council table, and the servants noticed that the terrible knights from the North Tower, which had come every week for a year, went quiet whenever the queen was near. Her first council meeting became a story the Citadel told for years. The border packs had been fighting over the river markets for a decade, and the noble lords had grown rich letting the quarrel burn. Grace listened for 2 hours, said nothing, and then asked one simple question about grain routes that no lord could answer because not one of them had ever been hungry. By sunset, she had drawn up a trade plan, so fair and so obvious that refusing it would have shamed every man at the table. Lord Hale muttered that it was beginner's luck. Adrian, watching his wife from the head of the table with an unreadable expression, said only, "Then we are fortunate the crown has married a beginner." After that, the king began finding reasons to be where she was. He appeared in the library at midnight with 2 cups of spiced tea and the excuse of a treaty that needed reading. He walked the walls with her at dusk, pointing out the mountains of his childhood. One evening, on the windswept roof of the great hall, he asked about her mother, and Grace surprised herself by telling him everything. The remedy book, the river, the way the whole pack had wept at Helen's burial, and then, within a season, let her wolfless daughter eat scraps. You loved them anyway, Adrian said. The pack. I loved what they could have been, Grace answered, and the king looked at her for a long, quiet moment, as if she had answered a question he had been asking his whole life. He did not speak of feelings, neither did she, but when an early frost came that week, a cloak of black fur lined with silver silk appeared in her chambers, cut precisely to her measure, and when she wore it into the courtyard the next morning, the entire citadel understood what the color meant. The king had dressed his queen in his own house colors, Whatever this marriage had begun as, it was becoming something else. Far to the south, Silver Creek was learning that victory could taste like ash. Ethan could not sleep. He could barely eat. The severed bond he had cut with his own words had left something torn behind his ribs that ached day and night, a wrongness that no healer could find and no drink could drown. The elders assured him it would pass. It did not pass. It grew. And Victoria, his perfect pureblood bride-to-be, had stopped performing the moment the audience went home. He heard it first through a closed door, the crack of a hand and a young maid crying, and Victoria's voice, sweet as ever, promising the girl far worse if the tea was cold again. He saw it in the way the household staff flinched when her gown whispered down a corridor. He saw it at dinner, when news arrived that Queen Grace had faced down the entire noble court, and Victoria's fork bent slowly in her white-knuckled grip. "That crown is mine," she said, very quietly, to no one at all. "It was always supposed to be mine." "What did you say?" Ethan asked. Victoria's face rearranged itself into a smile, between one heartbeat and the next. "Nothing, my love. Eat your dinner." That night, Ethan stood alone on the packhouse balcony, looking north toward mountains he could not see, rubbing at the ache behind his ribs, and asked himself for the first time what exactly the elders had shown him in the smoke, and who had been standing at their shoulder when they read it. The attack came on the night of the half-moon. Grace had taken to reading late in the royal library, a candlelit cathedral of books, where she was quietly teaching herself everything a queen was never supposed to need. The citadel slept around her. She heard nothing. No footstep, no breath, no warning at all, just the sudden cold kiss of air, as a shadow detached itself from behind the tall shelves and lunged, a curved silver dagger driving straight for her heart. Time went strange and slow. Grace saw the blade coming. She threw up her hands, knowing it was useless, knowing she was dead. And the world turned white. Light exploded out of her skin, her hands, her eyes, a soundless blast of pure silver radiance that lit the library like a second moon. The assassin was hurled backward through the air, as if struck by a giant's fist, smashing through a reading table and lying still. Every candle in the great room guttered flat, then stood straight again, and Grace stood in the settling dark with her hands still raised, watching threads of silver light crawl and fade beneath the skin of her arms, like living veins, feeling the hollow place in her chest blaze like a furnace door swung open. The doors burst inward. Adrian came through them first, half-changed, eyes wild, drawn from the far side of the citadel by something he could not have heard, with guards pouring in behind him. He took in the shattered table, the crumpled assassin, and his queen standing unharmed in a ring of scorched floor, and the beast in him folded itself away with visible effort. "You are bleeding," he said roughly. A shallow line, from the very tip of the silver blade, marked Grace's forearm, and the blood welling from it was not entirely red. It shimmered. The assassin was alive, and he was human, which made no sense at all, because no human alive should be able to slip past Lycan guards. On his wrist, they found a brand burned into the skin, a circle of thorns. When Adrian saw it, his face went so still and so cold that even his own guards stepped back. But it was old Martha's reaction that turned the room to ice. She had come running with her healer's bag, had seized Grace's bleeding arm to bind it, and had frozen at the sight of the shimmer in her blood, as if she had looked upon a ghost. "Merciful Mother Moon," the old woman whispered. Her hands were trembling. "It survived. All these years. It survived." "Martha," Adrian said sharply, "speak plainly." Martha looked up at Grace with tears standing in her ancient eyes, and what she said made the floor tilt under Grace's feet. "Child, you have been lied to your whole life. You are not wolfless. You never were. There is a wolf in you, a wolf like nothing this world has seen in 300 years, and it is not dead. It is caged." Her grip tightened on Grace's arm. "Someone built that cage inside you when you were small, and someone has been feeding it poison every year since, to keep it locked. Silverthorn. I would know its scent anywhere." The old healer's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "Your Majesty, someone has been poisoning you since you were a child. And whoever they are, tonight proves they know exactly what you are, and they have just stopped trying to cage you. Now they are trying to kill you before you wake." Martha worked through the night, and by dawn the truth was laid out on her table in small glass vials. and it was uglier than anyone had guessed. Silverthorn is not a killing poison, the old healer explained, holding a vial of Grace's shimmering blood up to the gray morning light. Adrian stood at the window like a storm, barely holding its shape. Grace sat very still, her bandaged arm in her lap. It is a binding poison. In a normal wolf, it blocks the change. In you, it did something far worse, because your wolf is not normal. Your wolf was strong enough at birth to be seen from the outside, so someone wrapped it in silverthorn like chains around a sleeping giant. The dose had to be renewed. Small amounts, steady, over years. Martha's mouth tightened. Your Majesty, think back. Was there anything you took regularly as a child? A medicine? A drink? The floor seemed to drop out from under Grace, because the answer was already there, sitting in her earliest memories in a small brown bottle. The tonic, she whispered. Dr. Price, the pack physician. He told my mother I was born with weak blood. Every week, from the time I was 5. 1 spoonful. Every week. My whole life. Her voice cracked on the next words. He told me it was keeping me alive. It was keeping you asleep, Martha said gently. Adrian had not moved from the window, but his voice came out flat and terrible. Where was your mother in this? My mother believed him. She was a healer, but Silverthorn is forgotten knowledge. You said so yourself. She trusted him. He was her colleague, her friend. Grace stopped. A memory was surfacing, one she had buried deep because it hurt too much to hold. Her mother's raised voice behind the clinic door, 1 week before the river. Helen shouting words a 12-year-old had not understood. What did you put in it? I tested it, Price. What did you put in my daughter? 7 days later, Helen, who had swum that river since girlhood, who knew every current and every stone, had drowned in calm water on a clear morning. Grace heard a high ringing in her ears. When her vision cleared, she found she was standing, her chair tipped over behind her, and silver light was leaking through the skin of her clenched fists, and Adrian had crossed the room and taken her hands in his, uncaring that they burned like small stars. She found out, Grace choked. My mother found out what he was doing, and they killed her for it. They drowned her, and they made me stand at her funeral, and then they handed me the same bottle the next week and told me she would have wanted me to keep taking my medicine. Then we find out who they are, Adrian said, and his eyes had gone dark gold, the beast rising to stand beside the man for once, instead of against him. All of them. And I promise you, Grace, on my crown and my name, that there is no hole in this world deep enough for them to hide in. The king's quiet spy master, a mild-faced man named Owen, who could walk through walls of secrets, left the citadel that same morning with 6 of his best shadows. The trail was old, but gold always leaves footprints. Dr. Price, it turned out, lived far too well for a pack physician. His accounts, teased open thread by thread, showed payments arriving 4 times a year for 15 years, always in unmarked coin, always through 3 sets of hands. Owen followed the coin backward through merchants and moneylenders until he found the mint mark that all the careful hands had been hired to hide. A bell, cast small into the edge of each gold piece. House Bell, the oldest, proudest pureblood family in the Southern Territories. Victoria's family. And the brand on the assassin's wrist told the second half of the tale. The Circle of Thorns was the mark of the Thorn Circle, a brotherhood of human hired blades so old and so secret that most wolves thought them a story. They took contracts no wolf would touch. Owen brought back one final piece, pried loose from a frightened middleman in a border tavern, and it was the piece that turned the puzzle into a picture. The Thorn Circle had held a standing contract with House Bell for 20 years. Its terms were strange. Not a killing contract, a watching one. Watch the girl, report if she wakes. And a second clause, added recently, in fresh ink. If the tonic is broken, end her. Use only human hands. Only human hands, Adrian repeated, standing over the gathered evidence in the council chamber, his voice soft in the way that made hardened soldiers go pale. Martha, why would that clause matter? The old healer had gone very still. Instead of answering, she left the chamber and returned with a book, and the book looked older than the citadel itself, bound in cracked white leather, its pages the color of weak tea. Because House Bell knows the old laws better than anyone, she said, and the old laws are why they caged her instead of killing her outright, 20 years ago, when it would have been easy. She opened the book to a page marked with a faded silver ribbon, and she read aloud, and her old voice seemed to fill with other, older voices as she did. When the moon eats the sun, a she-wolf shall be born of silver light, moon-born. She will stand above pure blood as the moon stands above the mountains. Her light will hold the beast, break the chain, and burn the lie. No wolf may spill moon-born blood without forfeit, for the moon does not forgive. The wolf who wounds her loses his own wolf, forever, to the last drop of his line. Silence took the council chamber. Grace realized her hands were pressed flat against the table, and that the table was trembling, and then she realized it was not the table. 20 years ago this autumn, Martha said quietly, closing the book, there was a silver eclipse over the southern territories. The moon ate the sun at midday. Every wolf alive remembers where they stood. And in a healer's cottage in Silver Creek, on that exact hour, a midwife delivered a baby girl who did not cry. The midwife reported that when the child opened her eyes, the room filled with light. The report went to the regional record hall, as all birth omens must. She looked up. The record hall administered by house bell. They knew from the first day, Grace whispered. They read that report, and they knew what I was. And they knew the prophecy said I would burn their lie. Whatever their lie is, they could not kill me without losing their wolves. So they bought my doctor, and they caged me in my own body, and when my mother caught them, they used human blades on her too. She lifted her eyes, and they were shining silver from rim to rim. I want my wolf back. There is a way, Martha said. The poison is nearly out of your blood already. That is why your light is breaking through. But the cage was built with silver, and it can only be fully broken, the way it was made, under the same sky. The old healer smiled then, fierce and bright, 40 years younger in a single moment. Child, the astronomers have been in an uproar for a month, and now I understand why the moon herself is impatient. There is an eclipse coming. 12 days from now, at midday, the moon eats the sun again. The first silver eclipse in 20 years. Your sky is coming back for you. 12 days later, the sun died at noon. They gathered in the citadel's oldest place, the roofless temple of the first wolves, a ring of standing stones on the high plateau where kings had been crowned for 1,000 years. Adrian had wanted it private. Grace had refused. Let them see, she had said. They called me defective in the light of day. Let them see the light of day change sides. So the court came, all of it, the nobles who had sneered, and the servants who had loved her, and the walls and towers of the citadel were black with watching figures as the moon slid across the face of the sun, and the world turned to silver twilight. Grace stood alone in the center of the stone ring, barefoot on the ancient rock, wearing a plain white shift, her mother's moonflower pendant against her heart. Martha's voice rolled out the old words of unbinding. The strange midday darkness deepened. The eclipse reached its peak, a black sun ringed in white fire. And the cage broke. Grace felt it go, felt 20 years of chains dissolve in a single blinding heartbeat, and the scream that tore out of her turned into something else halfway, something deeper and wilder and older, and light erupted from the stone circle, in a column that was seen, they later said, from 3 territories away. Within the light, her body flowed like silver water, and when the column faded, and the moon released the sun, and daylight came flooding back across the plateau, there was no woman standing in the ring of stones. There was a wolf. She was enormous, larger than any alpha who had ever lived, and her fur was not gray or white, but silver, true silver, every strand of it holding light the way water holds the moon. Her eyes were the white fire ring of the eclipse itself. When she moved, the daylight around her bent, drawn toward her like a tide, and the shadows of the standing stones leaned in to touch her. For 3 full heartbeats, the plateau was utterly silent. Then old Martha lowered herself to her knees, and it broke the spell, and it became a wave. The servants knelt, the guards knelt, fists to their hearts, the astronomers, the priests, the stable boys on the far walls. Lady Cora, whose family had stood unbowed through 6 dynasties, gathered her silk skirts with shaking hands and knelt in the dust of the temple floor. Lord Hale knelt beside her. The entire Lycan court, the proudest creatures under heaven, went down like a field of wheat in wind, until only one figure remained standing. Adrian walked forward alone, through the kneeling crowd, and stopped before the great silver wolf, whose head was higher than his own. His kingdom watched, and the Lycan King, who knelt to no power in this world, lowered himself to one knee before his wife, freely, gladly, and bowed his head. "My queen," he said, and the two words carried across the plateau like a coronation. The silver wolf lowered her great head and pressed her brow to his, and the light that moved through her fur moved gently over him as well, and every soul on that plateau saw the truth that would reshape the world. Not a king and his possession, not a bargain of terms. Two powers, meeting as equals, choosing each other. That night, they sat together on the flat roof of the North Tower, the tower he had once destroyed in his madness, and Adrian gave her his last secrets one by one, like a man laying down weapons. He told her about his father, the great king who had begun losing hours, then days, to the beast, who in his final year had chained himself each night and wept each morning, and who had ended surrounded by his own guard on a terrible red evening that the court had agreed to call a hunting accident. He told her how the sickness had begun in himself 5 years ago, right on schedule, the family curse arriving like winter, and how he had quietly ordered Martha to prepare a final mercy for the day he stopped coming back. He told her he had planned never to marry at all, never to pass the curse on, and to let the crown go to cousins when the beast finally won. "Then I stood in the shadows at a border ceremony I attended on a whim," he said, looking out at the stars, "and a girl the whole world called broken walked past me with her head high, and the beast, which had been clawing at me for 5 years without 1 hour of quiet, simply lay down." He turned to look at her. "I told myself I offered you marriage for politics. Honesty, always. That was my own term. So here is the honesty. I offered. Because for the first time in 5 years, I was not afraid. I was selfish, Grace. I bound your life to a dying man because you made the dying stop hurting." "And now?" Grace asked quietly. "Now? I am afraid of something completely different," said the most feared king in the world, and he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a hand that was not quite steady. "I am afraid that I have fallen in love with my own wife, and that she signed up for a bargain, not for this." The moon rose over the mountains, and Grace looked at the man beneath the crown and gave him honesty back. "The bargain got me out of the rain," she said. "I stayed for this." They were interrupted at midnight by horns at the gate, and the horns announced the last person Grace ever expected to stand at her door. Ethan had ridden 6 days almost without sleeping. He came into the torchlit courtyard travel-stained and hollow-eyed, and behind him trailed a line of tribute wagons from Silver Creek, loaded with gifts, and behind those trailed Alpha Richard himself, gray-faced with fear, because the summons to swear loyalty had come due, and everyone in the world had now heard what the wolfless girl had become. But it was Ethan who dropped to his knees on the courtyard stones the moment Grace appeared, in front of his father, in front of the royal guard, in front of everyone. "I was deceived," he said, and the raw misery in his voice was real. She could hear that it was real, and once, that voice breaking would have broken her too. "Grace, I swear it on my mother's grave. The elders showed me an omen in the sacred smoke, a vision that a wolfless Luna would bring Silver Creek to ruin, that the goddess herself demanded a pureblood. I know now the smoke was tampered with. I know who paid our head elder. I have seen the gold. It carries a bell stamped on the edge, and I am prepared to stand witness before your throne." He looked up at her, and tears stood openly in his eyes. "But first I had to say it to your face. I am sorry. I threw away the truest heart in 5 packs, because I was a boy who let old men do his thinking. I do not ask you to take me back. I know that door is closed. I ask you to forgive me. I cannot sleep. I cannot breathe right, since the severing. Grace, please." The courtyard held its breath. Adrian stood back in the shadows of the archway and did not move, because this was hers to answer, and he knew it. Grace came down the steps slowly and stood over the kneeling man she had loved for 8 years, and searched herself for the rage she was owed, and found something colder and cleaner instead. "I believe you were deceived," she said at last, and Ethan's shoulders sagged with hope, and then she finished. "But hear what I believe with it. The smoke lied to you about my worth, Ethan, but the smoke did not make you reject me under a blood moon in front of 5 packs, when a private word would have done. It did not make you stand silent while they laughed. It did not make you give me until sunrise, in a storm, alone. The elders handed you the knife, but the cut was yours. She let the words settle into him, like stones into deep water. Your testimony against House Bell, my throne accepts, and Silver Creek will have fair dealing from this crown, always, because your pack is not guilty of your choices. But your peace is not mine to give back. What you feel behind your ribs is the shape of what you threw away. Carry it. Let it make you a better alpha than your father. She turned away, queen from crown to heel, and paused at the top of the steps. You asked for forgiveness. Earn it. Not from me. From the next powerless girl your pack decides is worthless. She walked inside, and did not look back, and Ethan knelt on the cold stones for a long time in the torchlight, holding her words like coals. 600 miles south, on that same midnight, a hooded rider on an exhausted horse reached a hidden camp deep in the rogue lands beyond the border, where the fires of 2,000 lawless wolves burned in a valley that appeared on no map. Guards seized the rider at the perimeter and dragged her to the great tent at the camp's heart, and when they pulled the hood back, firelight fell across the beautiful, furious, desperate face of Victoria Bell. The man in the great tent looked up from his war maps and began, slowly, to smile. He had the royal family's dark gold eyes, set in a crueler face, and an old scar where a crown might once have sat. "Well," said Lucas, exiled brother of the Lycan King, in a voice like silk over a knife, "the little bell has finally rung. Come in, my dear. I hear my brother has found himself a moon-born queen, and I hear your family's gold built the cage that failed to hold her." He gestured to the seat across from him, and outside, 2,000 rogues sharpened silver in the dark. "Sit, tell me everything, and then let us give my brother a war." The wagon was stopped at the mountain pass 3 days later, and what Owen's shadows found inside it changed everything the crown thought it knew about its own sickness. It was an ordinary tribute shipment, the kind that rolled up from the southern territories 4 times a year, and it had been rolling up for 2 decades. Wine for the royal table, in barrels stamped with the marks of a dozen loyal houses. But Owen had begun tracing every thread that led back to House Bell, and one thread led here, to a wine merchant whose license had been quietly sponsored by a Bell-stamped signature 19 years ago. Martha spent one night with the confiscated barrels and came to the king's study at dawn without knocking, and the old healer, who had held her calm through poison and prophecy, was shaking with fury. "Wolfsbane and silverthorn," she said, setting a small dish of pale residue on the desk, between Adrian and Grace. "Ground fine as flour, and folded into the southern vintage. A dose too small to taste, too small to kill. Just enough, glass by glass, year by year, to inflame the beast in Lycan blood, and wear away the wall, between the man and the animal." She looked at Adrian, and her eyes were wet. "Sire, your line does not carry a curse. It never did. Your father was not sick. He was poisoned at his own table for 20 years, by the wine his loyal South sent him, and when it finally broke him, we called it madness, and buried him ashamed, and then they simply kept pouring, and we watched it start in you, and we called it inheritance." Adrian sat very still for a long moment, and Grace watched 20 years of grief and dread rearrange themselves in his face into something new and hard as forged iron. His whole life, he had believed his own blood was a countdown. He had planned his death around a lie brewed in a barrel. "How long since I last drank the southern vintage?" he finally asked. His voice was frighteningly calm. Martha almost smiled. "Since the week you married, sire. The queen switched your table to northern wine. She said the southern gave her headaches." Adrian turned and looked at his wife. "You changed the wine because of headaches." "I changed the wine," Grace said, "because it arrived through channels nobody could name, and after a childhood like mine, I do not drink anything with a story I cannot follow." She took his hand across the desk. "Your episode stopped when I came, Adrian. Everyone said it was me. It was partly just the wine leaving your blood. I only bought you the quiet. House Bell sold you the storm. The proof was assembled within the week, and it was a mountain. The tonic ledgers, the mint-marked gold, the thorn circle contract, the tainted barrels, with 19 years of shipping records tying them to a Bell-sponsored merchant. The tampered omen at Silver Creek, sworn to under oath by Ethan and, once he grasped how deep the water was around his own throne, by a very pale Alpha Richard. And beneath all of it, like a rotten foundation stone, Owen's people found one last document in the regional record hall that House Bell had controlled for a century. A registry page, 3 generations old, where the bloodline of a small extinct house had been carefully rewritten, ink over scraped vellum, grafting the Bell family onto a pureblood ancestry that had never been theirs. The proudest pureblood house in the South was a forgery. Their whole gleaming position, the marriages, the titles, the worship, rested on a scraped page, and a moon-born queen, whose light was prophesied to burn the lie, was the one thing on earth they could never allow to exist. Everything they did makes sense now, Grace said quietly, looking at the forged page under lamplight. They caged me to protect a lie. They poisoned 2 kings to weaken the throne that might one day examine it, and they raised Victoria her entire life for a single purpose: to put Bell blood inside the royal line before anyone could look too closely at what Bell blood actually was. Adrian summoned the Summit of Pax, the first in a generation. Every alpha on the continent was called to the Citadel to hear the Crown's evidence, to witness the judgment of House Bell, and to stand united, because Owen's shadows brought back one more report, this one from the far rogue lands. The camps beyond the border were emptying. Something was gathering the lawless clans under one banner, and buying them silver, and the banner carried a wolf with a broken crown. Lucas, Adrian said, when Owen laid the report before him, and the name came out carrying 10 years of old grief. My father exiled him for trying to take the throne with rogue steel, while the king lay chained to his own madness. My brother has been in the dark all this time, and now House Bell's last hope has gone to find him, and she has brought him the truth about the wine as a wedding gift. He looked at the map, at the passes between the rogue lands and the Citadel. He will not wait for us to finish uniting. If I were him, I would strike at the summit itself, every alpha in one hall, cut off every head in a single evening. Then we hold the summit anyway, Grace said, and the council stared at her. If we hide, the packs scatter, and he hunts them one by one through the winter. If we gather, we choose the ground. Let him come to the one fortress in the world, where the moon herself lives. Her eyes had taken on that white fire ring. Let him bring his silver to my house. They prepared in secret, doubled watches, dressed as servants. The warwolves staged in the inner yards. Martha brewing counter-tinctures against silver dust by the cauldronful. And on the first night of the summit, the great hall of the Citadel blazed with the banners of 40 packs, and alphas who had feuded for lifetimes sat under one roof, and the evidence against House Bell was carried in on iron trays and laid out for the continent to see. The patriarch of House Bell, Victoria's father, a silver-bearded lord named Edward, with a lifetime of practiced dignity, rose from his seat and performed magnificently. Lies, forgeries, a wolfless upstart queen, weaving a plot to destroy an ancient house out of common jealousy. He was still speaking, one arm flung wide in outrage, when Grace noticed 3 things in the space of a single breath. The servants refilling the braziers along the walls were men she had never fed in her kitchens. The new logs they were laying on the coals were coated in something that glittered, and Edward, mid-sentence in his own defense, had quietly stepped backward, out of the center of the hall, toward the door. Adrian, Grace said, the braziers. The world exploded into chaos. The coated logs caught, and a fine silver dust bloomed off the flames and rolled through the hall in a shining mist, and every Lycan guard who breathed it staggered, as if the air itself had turned to chains. In the same heartbeat, the disguised servants pulled blades from the firewood carts. The outer doors boomed as something heavy struck them from without, and high in the gallery, a captain of the gate watch, whose new manner no one had thought to question, threw the great lever that opened the north entrance to the night. Rogues poured in with the cold air, hundreds of them, silver on every edge, and at their heads strode a tall figure with dark gold eyes, and a scar where a crown might have sat, and the hall knew him, and the name went through 40 packs like a dropped torch. Lucas. Brother, the exile called across the erupting hall, his voice bright with 10 years of hunger. You should see your face. Did you truly believe I spent a decade in the dark learning patience? I spent it learning where every door in this fortress is, and the price of every man who guards one. What followed was battle, but Grace would remember it as weather, a storm of bodies and noise through which she moved with a strange, ringing clarity. The alphas of 40 packs, insulted at their own summit, shook off their shock and answered with 40 packs of fury. The warwolves came over the inner balconies like a gray flood. Martha's tinctures passed hand to hand and gave the guards back their strength. The tide was turning, room by room, and Grace was pulling a wounded young alpha behind the shield line when she heard, above all of it, the sound she had prayed never to hear again, the roar from the North Tower. Except the North Tower was here. She turned and saw it happen, saw Lucas, unable to reach the throne, do the next cruelest thing and hurl a slim silver spear across the hall, not at any soldier, but at Adrian's unguarded back as the king dragged two elders clear of the fighting. Saw Adrian twist at the last instant, too late, the silver taking him deep through the shoulder. Saw him fall to one knee, and saw the silver, that same poison that had eaten his father's mind, meet 20 years of residue in his blood and light it like a fuse. The change that took Adrian then was nothing like the tower. It was total. The beast that rose out of the falling king was black as a starless night, and half again the size of any Lycan in the hall, and it did not know friend from foe, and its first blind sweep threw 4 rogues and 2 of his own guards across the stones together. The fighting around it simply stopped. Rogues and pack wolves alike fell back from that corner of the hall, because there was no side in existence that the thing before them was on. "Clear the hall," Lucas shouted to his own lines, laughing, already withdrawing toward the north door with his surviving rogues, because this was better than any victory his blades could buy. Let the packs watch their king eat his own summit. Look at your protector, alphas. Look at the throne of the moon. Grace walked out of the shield line, alone, into the empty circle around the beast. She heard Martha scream her name. She heard 40 packs go silent. The beast's black eyes found her, and there was nothing of Adrian in them, and it gathered itself to lunge. And Grace reached, not for a weapon, but for the one thing she had left unspoken. The bond had been there for months, unfinished, a door both of them had been too careful to open. 2 people who had been taught by their whole lives that love was a thing that got taken away. She was done being careful. She let her light rise, not as a blast this time, but as a mantle, silver flooding out of her skin, until she stood robed in moonfire in the center of the great hall, and she walked straight up to the beast that was her husband, and pressed her burning palm flat against its chest, over the heart, in the same place as that first night in the ruined tower. "Adrian, son of the moon," she said, and her voice was hers, and was also something vaster, ringing off the banners of 40 packs. "I choose you, not by bargain, not by terms. My blood to blood, light to light, my wolf to yours, I bind my soul to the man, and my light to the beast, from this night until the moon herself goes dark. Come back to me, come home." The mating bond snapped into place like a star being born. Light poured from her hand into the black fur, and thin silver lines raced across the beast like dawn cracking a night sky, and the great creature shuddered, and folded, and shrank, and then Adrian was on his knees in the circle of her light, with the silver spear falling from his shoulder, pushed out by the closing wound, and his eyes were gold, and they were his, and they were looking up at her with an expression that no one who stood in that hall ever forgot. 40 packs of alphas came to their feet with a sound like the sea. It should have ended there. It nearly did. But across the hall, one rogue archer, forgotten in the gallery, had stayed behind for the reward Lucas had promised for a single target, and in the roar of the crowd, no one heard the bow draw. No one but a young alpha of Silver Creek who had spent months learning exactly what he owed. Grace never even saw the danger. She only saw Ethan appear out of the crowd, moving faster than he had ever moved in his life, and put himself into the space between the gallery and his queen. He took the silver bolt below the shoulder and went down without a sound. The archer did not get a second shot. The werewolves saw to that. And then Grace was on her knees on the bloody stones, with her old life's love dying under her hands, while her new life's love knelt on the other side of him. And Ethan looked up at them both, and managed something that was almost a smile. "There," he whispered. "Now the scales are level. Tell Silver Creek, tell them their alpha finally did his own thinking." "You do not get to die," Grace said fiercely, silver light already pouring from her palms into the wound, fighting the burning metal, and Martha was shouting for her kit, and the hall was a storm of noise. "That is a royal command, Ethan. You will live, and you will spend every year of it being the man you should have been. Breathe." Far above the chaos, through the shattered north windows, the night sky was changing. Alphas began pointing upward, going quiet one by one, and the quiet spread until even the wounded turned their faces to the sky. The moon, which had risen thin and white and ordinary, was deepening, minute by minute, into a heavy, waiting red. A blood moon, weeks early, out of season, out of order, hanging over the citadel like a sealed decree. Beyond the walls, from the black hills where Lucas's horns were regrouping his thousands, a single sentence rolled down on the wind, in a voice like silk over a knife. "Look up, brother. Even the moon bleeds for me. I will see you both very soon." The army came down out of the hills on the third night of the red moon, and it came like a flood breaking a dam. The scouts had counted 4,000 rogues, gathered from every lawless corner of the continent, bought with house bell gold, and armed with more silver than the crown had believed existed in the world. Against them stood the citadel, the royal guard, the war wolves, and the 40 packs whose alphas, after what they had witnessed in the Great Hall, had refused to a man to go home. When Adrian had offered them the choice, honor released, roads open, the eldest alpha of the mountain packs had answered for all of them. "Our fathers knelt to a crown," he said. "We have seen a queen walk into the mouth of a beast for love, and a king kneel to his wife in the dust. We are not going anywhere." But Martha, on the eve of battle, brought a warning that turned the war council cold. "The red moon is not just an omen, it is a weight," she told them, her old hands flat on the map table. "A blood moon drags at the beast in every Lycan, the way the moon drags the tide. 3 nights it has hung there, growing heavier. Your soldiers feel it. In the fury of battle, under that sky, some of them will slip, and a battle line, where the beasts break loose, is a battle line that eats itself. Lucas knows this. His rogues are common wolves. They do not carry the Lycan beast. He did not choose this moon by accident. He means for your own strength to be the knife in your back." "Then the answer stands right here," said the eldest alpha, and looked at Grace. "The prophecy said it plainly. Her light will hold the beast." "The prophecy also never said how," Grace answered quietly. "I have held one beast, one time, with both hands and a bond. There will be 1,000 Lycans on that wall." She looked around the table at the faces watching her, and she did not soften it, because they deserved truth. "I will spend everything I have. I just do not know if everything I have is enough. No Moonborn has stood in the world for 300 years. There is no one alive to teach me my own limits." Adrian reached over and covered her hand with his. "Then we learn them together," he said. "That is the whole marriage, Grace. That was always the whole marriage." The horns sounded at midnight. The first assault struck the eastern wall behind a rain of silver-tipped fire arrows that turned the sky into a burning net. Grace stood on the high gatehouse with the wind pulling at her cloak, and when the fire came down toward the pack defenders, she found her first limit and broke straight through it. Her light rose off her like a second sunrise and spread into a rippling dome above the eastern battlements, and the burning arrows struck it and simply died, falling as cold ash, and along the wall 1,000 defenders, who had braced to burn, looked up at the shimmering silver sky, between them and death, and began to roar her name. The rogues hit the walls with ladders and grapples in wave after wave, and the night dissolved into the long, grinding fury of a siege. The defenders held. The war wolves swept the courtyards clear of every breach. Adrian was everywhere, huge and calm at the center of every crisis, the silver light of his bond mark burning through his armor at the shoulder, and where the king fought, the line did not even bend. Twice, Lycan soldiers began to slip under the red moon's weight, eyes blackening mid-battle, and both times Grace felt it happen through the light, like a discord in a song, and reached through the dome, and steadied them, and the blackness drained away, and left shaken men still standing in their own minds. She was the shield above, and the anchor below, and the third limit she broke that night was the belief that she would run dry. Then, in the darkest hour before dawn, she saw the collars. A fresh wave of rogues was being driven toward the west wall, and they moved wrong, stiff and lurching, and around every neck gleamed a thin band of dark metal, and Grace, looking down from the gatehouse with eyes that now saw truth, the way other eyes saw color, understood what she was looking at. Forced oath collars. An outlawed horror from the old dark centuries, binding the will of the wearer to the holder of the master ring. Half of Lucas's terrifying army had not been bought at all. It had been enslaved, clan by clan, family by family, the collars locked on and the choice taken away, and the free rogues fought fiercely in front, because the collared ones were driven mercilessly behind. Something in Grace went very quiet and very vast. She stepped up onto the rampart itself, into full view of both armies, a lone figure robed in silver fire under the bleeding moon, and she stopped shielding, and started reaching. Her light poured down the outside of the wall and across the battlefield, not as a weapon, but as a tide, rolling through friend and enemy alike, harming no living thing, and everywhere it touched a collar, the dark metal hissed and cracked, and fell away into ash. 400 enslaved wolves stopped, mid-charge, as their own minds came flooding back. For a moment, the entire battle held its breath. Then the freed clans turned, looked back at the slave masters who had driven them, looked up at the burning silver figure on the wall who had asked for nothing in return, and made the choice that broke the siege. 400 wolves knelt on the battlefield to the moonborn queen, then rose, and turned their fury on the army that had collared them. Lucas's flood crashed against itself and began to drown. By the gray edge of dawn, it was finished everywhere except one place. Lucas himself, seeing his numbers dissolve, did the last clever thing left to him. He came to the broken ground before the main gate under an ancient banner of parley, and in front of both exhausted armies, he invoked a law older than the citadel. Right of the challenge, he called up at the walls, and his voice carried that old silk-over-a-knife brightness even now. Blood claim to the crown, settled by single combat, king against claimant, before witnesses of the Pax. Refuse me, brother, and the old law brands you coward, and the crown forfeit. You know the words. You knelt through the same lessons I did. He spread his arms and smiled. Or has the great Adrian learned to hide behind his wife's light? He is baiting you, Grace said quietly. He has silver on every edge and something worse up his sleeve, and you have a spear wound 3 nights old. Yes, Adrian said. He was already unbuckling his cloak. And he is also correct about the law. If I refuse, the crown is disputed, and this war never ends. It just goes underground and comes back in 10 years to face our children instead. He turned to her and cupped her face in both hands, and for one heartbeat, the king vanished, and there was only the man from the rooftop. Trust the marriage, Grace, terms and all, loyalty before the world. Honesty always, she answered, hating it, accepting it. Then hear my honesty. If you die, I am dragging you back and making you apologize. The armies formed a vast ring on the broken ground. By the law of the right, no soul could interfere, on pain of forfeiting the very crown at stake. And Grace stood at the ring's edge, with her light banked down to embers, and her heart in her teeth, learning her hardest limit of all, which was standing still. The brothers met in the center, as the red moon touched the western hills. Lucas fought the way he schemed, brilliant and filthy. Silver edges, silver dust palmed and flung, a decade of exile's tricks. But he had built his whole gamble on facing the brother he remembered, the haunted king with poison in his blood and a beast at his throat. And that man no longer existed. Adrian came at him clean and patient and utterly clear. The beast not fighting him, but fighting beside him, bonded and steady, and slowly, exchange by exchange, thought before 10,000 watching eyes, the exile's brilliance began to come apart against the simple fact of what his brother had become. Lucas's dust met a turned shoulder, his edges met air, his fury met calm. And when at last Adrian put him down on the broken ground, sword point at his throat, and offered him the ancient mercy words, surrender and live, the watching world saw Lucas's face twist with the truth he could not survive, which was that even now, even here, his brother was offering him a door. Lucas chose the other thing. He rolled from under the blade, but not toward Adrian. He came up sprinting toward the ring's edge, toward the banked silver figure standing there, with a hidden knife out and 10 years of hatred aimed at the one target whose loss would truly break his brother. And the crowd's scream and Adrian's roar came together, both too far, both too late, and the knife's edge caught Grace across the palm she threw up, and one bright drop of moonborn blood fell to the broken ground. The world went silent, as if the night itself had inhaled. The wolf who wounds her loses his own wolf, forever. The moon does not forgive. The change came over Lucas, between one stride and the next. He staggered, as if the ground had tilted. The dark gold drained out of his eyes, like water from a cracked cup, leaving them an ordinary, human brown. The strength ran out of his frame, the wolf scent guttered off him like a blown candle, and the knife dropped from fingers that were suddenly just fingers, and Lucas, claimant to the Lycan crown, stood swaying in the center of 10,000 wolves as the one thing he had spent his life despising above all others. Wolfless, he began to scream. Not from pain, from absence. And it was Grace, her cut hand still dripping light, who stepped forward and ended the rite with a judgment that no one in that crowd ever forgot, because it was crueler than any blade and cleaner than any mercy. "Let him live," she said, and her voice rolled over both armies. "Take his silver, take his banner, and let him live every remaining year exactly as he is. He built his war on the belief that the wolfless are nothing. Let him go and find out." They led him away in chains. He no longer had the strength to break, and as the sun's edge finally cracked the horizon, every soul on that field watched the heavy red bleed slowly out of the setting moon, deepening, then fading, then gone, until it hung above the western hills clean and silver and new, as if it had never carried blood at all. Martha wept openly on the wall. The moon had rendered its verdict. The judgment of House Bell came 7 days later, before the assembled alphas of the continent in the Great Hall, where the scorch marks of the coup had been left deliberately unrepaired. Edward Bell was carried in still performing, gray-bearded dignity wrapped around him like a stolen cloak, demanding trials and rights and respect for 10 generations of pure blood. Grace let him finish. Then she had the registry stones brought in, the ancient blood record pillars in which every noble line's founding oath was sealed, and before the silent hall, she laid her hand on the Bell family's stone and let her light sink into it, because the prophecy had promised one thing above all the others: her light will burn the lie. The stone's surface seemed to peel under the silver glow, the proud record of 10 pureblood generations shriveled like fog in sunlight, and beneath it, preserved in the deep grain where the forger's tools had never reached, the original oath stood exposed to the entire continent. A minor house, a common line, 3 generations of scraped vellum and stolen glory, and under the moonborn light, standing before the truth of his own blood, Edward Bell found that his mouth would no longer shape the lie, because no falsehood stands in moonborn light, and the continent listened as the patriarch of House Bell, in a flat and emptied voice, confessed to all of it. The forged registry, the cage of silverthorn built inside a 5-year-old girl, the 20 years of poisoned tribute that had destroyed one king and nearly destroyed another, the bought elders and the tampered omen at Silver Creek, and, last, in a hall gone deathly still, the standing contract with the Thorn Circle, and the calm morning, 15 years ago, when a healer named Helen had come to Dr. Price with a tested tonic in her hand, and House Bell had ordered the river to take her. Grace stood through it without moving, tears bright and unfallen, Adrian's hand steady at her back, and when the confession ended, the crown's judgment came down like winter. House Bell was dissolved, its stolen name struck from the registry stones forever. Its lands and gold went to the packs it had bled, and the largest single share went to Silver Creek, to be held in trust in the name of Helen the Healer, funding a hall of healing where any child, of any blood or none, would be treated without price. Dr. Price and the bought elders went to the northern labor mines for the rest of their lives. Edward Bell followed them, stripped of everything but breath. And Victoria, captured in the collapse of the rogue camp, wearing a stolen soldier's cloak, was brought to the foot of the throne she had been raised her whole life to steal, and heard her sentence from the woman she had called a lovely placeholder. No mines, no chains. Her rank, her name, and her forged pure blood were stripped before the continent, and she was sentenced to 7 years of honest service as a healer's maid in the poorest border pack in the South, scrubbing floors, boiling linens, and tending the powerless, under her own watching neighbors, as plain Victoria of nowhere. She screamed as they led her out, and what she screamed was that she was a Bell, she was a pureblood, she was somebody, and the Hall of Alphas watched her go and understood the deep, clean cruelty of it, that the Queen had sentenced her to the exact life she had helped inflict on a wolfless girl, with one difference. Grace had lived it innocent. Victoria would live it knowing why. Ethan left for home on the first warm morning of spring. He had fought the Silver Bolt's poison for weeks, and Martha and Grace between them had dragged him back from the edge of the dark, and he walked now with a cane and a slow care that would fade with the years. Alpha Richard had stepped down in shame the day Edward's confession reached Silver Creek. The pack had, to its own surprise, voted its heir back to lead it anyway, on the strength of a bell-stamped ledger he had carried 6 days without sleep, and a silver bolt he had taken in front of 40 packs. Grace walked him to the gate herself. For a moment they stood where a courtyard of torchlight had once stood between them, and there was nothing left to say that had not been said, so Ethan said the other thing instead. "There is a girl in the Eastern Flats," he told her, "born without a wolf, 12 years old. Her pack was going to cast her out this summer. The old way." He looked at his queen, and managed a crooked shadow of the smile she remembered from a boy who once carried her home on his back. "She arrived at Silver Creek last week. First student of the Helen Hall of Healing. I sponsored her myself. I figured I would start earning where you told me to." "Then go be a good alpha, Ethan," Grace said softly, and gave him back, at last, the one thing his ribs had ached for through every mile of that year. "You are forgiven. Now deserve it." He bowed to his queen, and rode south, and did. They held the true mating ceremony on Midsummer Night, in the roofless Temple of the Standing Stones, under a moon so bright the mountains cast shadows. It was nothing like the midnight bargain in the rain-lashed chapel. The plateau overflowed with the continent. Alphas and elders, servants and stable hands, freed clans from beyond the border standing shoulder to shoulder with the noble court, Lady Cora weeping into Lord Hale's handkerchief without a shred of dignity and not caring at all. Grace wore white and silver, her mother's moonflower pendant sewn over her heart, and walked to the stone ring through a corridor of 10,000 bowed heads. The old priestess bound their wrists with the same silver cord as the first time, and this time, when the vows were spoken, the words were their own. "You found me in the rain with nothing," Grace said, "and offered me terms instead of pity. So here are my final terms. Honesty always, loyalty always, and love always," which was never in the contract, and became the whole contract. "I offered a bargain to a stranger because she made the dying stop," Adrian said, and his voice, which had never needed to be raised, carried to the last rank of the crowd anyway. "I stand here married to the moon's own daughter, and the only crown I care about is her hand in mine. Terms accepted. All of them. Forever." The priestess pronounced the bond complete. The king kissed his queen under the summer moon, and 10,000 voices shook snow loose from peaks 10 miles away, and above the standing stones, witnesses swore ever afterward. The moon flared visibly brighter, like a mother lighting a lamp in a window. 1 year later, on a quiet evening, the Queen of the Lycans sat in the Citadel garden among the moonflowers she had planted from Silver Creek cuttings, listening to her husband argue with old Martha about whether the Northern Healers' School needed a second building, and she smiled to herself, because the answer was yes, and Martha always won. Peace held across the territories. The wall between Lycan and Pack, rogue and noble, blooded and wolfless, was coming down stone by stone, treaty by treaty, student by student. The freed clans had settled the green valleys beyond the border, and sent their children to Helen Hall. And in the record stones of the Citadel, the first entry of the new dynasty had already been carved, awaiting only a name. Adrian came and knelt beside her chair in the dusk, done arguing, and laid his hand gently over hers, over the small, sure curve where, beneath both their palms, a tiny second heartbeat had recently begun to answer theirs. If it was a girl, they had already decided, she would be called Helen. The moon rose over the garden wall, full and silver and watchful, and Grace leaned her head against her husband's shoulder and thought, with a peace deeper than the mountains, of a stone circle, and a boy's cruel words, and a cold walk into the rain that had turned out to be a walk toward everything. Once, under a blood moon, in front of 5 packs, a boy rejected her for a pureblood omega. It was the greatest gift he ever gave her.